I'd like to introduce Karl Stewart. You might remember Karl because, well, he's from Princeton, but I met him because he's a regular attendee at our Historical Society meetings. But I learned a little bit about him online. He was raised in the hills of West Virginia. And I'll have to talk to you about that because Chris's father was also raised in West Virginia. But he initially began studying for the Catholic priesthood after high school, but left to join the U.S. Army in the late 1960s and the elite Green Beret Special Forces. After returning to civilian life, he became a high school social studies and English teacher, and he earned a master's degree in education. He taught right here in Princeton. I guess, show of hands, does anybody here have Mr. Stewart for... Oh, we have a couple of your past students.
Would you say your names?
I'm Pancho.
Okay.
Trevor.
Kevin, yeah, long time ago.
Yeah.
I have trouble, by the way, I ask for names continually because I had one reason I stopped teaching here was because I had a medical event and part of that involved a short-term memory loss and the names disappeared.
Yeah.
So if I know you and I ask you your name, don't be offended. It's just, I'm mental.
I think I had one of those medical events too. So. But that's Mimi
Kaharski.
Oh yes, I remember Mimi. Yes,
okay. Sure. All right. But he taught in Princeton, but then he retired from teaching in 2005 to devote himself to two things which he's always had an overriding passion for, which is writing and his family. And like I said, Karl's a regular attendee of our Historical Society meetings, and we have many Native American arrowheads and points that Karl donated to the museum, which are on display back in our pre-Princeton history exhibit. And I'm excited to have Karl here as our very first speaker in the newly renovated museum. So let's give Karl a big Now, we're going to attempt technology for the first time in the museum.
Yes, we're going to try the technology.
All right.
We'll see. By the way, while he's working this out, I taught here for 25 years at the high school, English and Social Studies. I graduated from UW-Madison with, it was a degree in political science and history with a minor in English. That was my interest. But that was after I came back from the military. And then I went back to university because before, when I first went to University of Wisconsin, like a lot of young men, I had no clue, okay, what I was doing, what I was about, or even why I was there. I spent most of my time playing intramural basketball, hanging out at the Union, drinking beer, smoking, and doing what university guys generally do when they're supposed to be studying, which is not. And so, going nowhere there, I somehow got lucky enough to think, I got to get out of this. So I dropped out in the middle of my sophomore year with a C- average. And I was lucky to get that. I had no idea. I attended the class occasionally and joined the Army, and one thing led to another, so I ended up in the Green Berets back in the 1960s. 66 to 69, came back, went to university and graduated, and it was a snap. Yeah, I have no idea how the university simplified its demands and made it so easy for me. When I came back from the Army, I graduated, went cum laude. So the military did a good thing for me, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I love history. I always have. I was here years ago presenting my first book, which was this one, when I first started writing. The Last Long Drive, a Western. It's first of 3 Westerns that I wrote that the publishing company liked. And matter of fact, I sent this in, I remember I sent it in 24 different publishing houses. One liked it. And the comment back is not anything you're going to put on a wall. It said, we think it has, your book, The Last Long Drive, has commercial merit. Not as good writing, not that it's good English, not that the history is exciting. It has commercial merit. In other words, they could sell some books. So, but anyway, since then I decided to just keep going. So I wrote a series of 8 books. It's historical fiction because I like the history. And it's one family, the same family, through 4 generations, covering about 100 years from the 1860s to the 1960s. So it starts in the Old West and goes right on through the book today. So that's where I'm going. That's kind of the background of it.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So if you wanted to read one of those books, do you recommend starting at the beginning so you can learn the family, or can you jump in anywhere?
Thanks for asking that, because that's, I always get somebody says, oh, I don't like Westerns. I don't care. It doesn't matter. This is a series, but it's not a serial.
Okay.
I grew up in the hills of West Virginia. That's what you mentioned. If you could find a book back there, you were lucky. I'm serious. There were not many books around up there where we lived up on the ridge. And when someone would give you a book that required another book, that was the most frustrating experience in the world. Because you'd never find the books that came after it. So when I decided to write the series, each one is standalone. They're separate stories, separate people, in the same family. But it changes. The first 3 are Westerns, and the main character is a guy named Seabird, based on my great-grandfather, granddad. He was a rodeo star. Matter of fact, I just was down in Missouri. I got to see some broncs, what they call them, bucking horses. And he rode rodeos, broncs, and things like that. So the first 3 books I used him. Charlie's Wings is actually the newest book. This just came out in June. I'd write him however I wanted to. So this is the most recent in the series, the last book in the series, but this is the most recent one I wrote. Okay, this is a World War I novel, World War II novel, growing up in West Virginia, and then that book. You can probably get the idea, it's pretty much my family fictionalized. Okay? If anybody thinks this is biographical or autobiographical, you're going to make some mistakes, okay? But that's what writers do. You get to be free to write what you want. And if history's not good enough, you never let the facts stand in your way of a good story. Okay. Okay, I'll start right here. Am I going to do this, or are you? Should I?
Yeah, try it.
I'll try it.
That's
See.
what.
All right. So this is a novel of The Green Beret. The Green Light's a piece of historic. By the way, I'm reading a script because my wife says otherwise I go on too long. So I'm just going to try to stick to this. But if you have any questions, just ask. I'll be glad to stop and answer any question you have. The Green Light's a piece of historical fiction, as are all my novels. Fiction based on historical fact. Mark Twain once said, "Get your facts first. Then you can distort them however you please." It is the tale of the Green Berets in the late 1960s. Specifically, it's the story of a 7th Special Forces A team, A-54, and their exploits from Cuba to South America and Bolivia at that time. And more particularly is the story of Stu Carter Jr., an aimless young man, sounds familiar, naive, confused, who drops out of college and subsequently finds himself pledged to the fraternity of the American Army's most elite fighting unit. Then, once in it, he must choose what sort of man he is. Sergeant Carter, as he becomes, must decide how, or even if, concepts such as courage, honor, integrity, loyalty, and self-sacrifice can become a part of his character. And the events of this book develop that. Okay. Oh, good. Good work. And just a little background history. I'm not going to tell you the book. If you want to know the book, you got to read the thing. There it is. It's all. I think it's in the library. I'm not sure about that, but some of them are, not all of them. If you like them in the library, go in and tell the lady, get them in the library, and they can put them there. Just a bit of history, this to set the stage for the book. Over half a century has passed since the 1960s, and for the younger generation of readers who may not be familiar with that time, or for those of us whose memories may have faded just a bit, let me recap some events then that are pertinent to this novel.
You accidentally danced through the slides. So.
That's okay.
Okay.
Oh, I kind of went too fast though, didn't I? There, that, no, where do I go? There, that one. Yeah. Advisors in the Jungle. Ike, President Eisenhower, in the 1950s, after World War II, when French went back into Indochina to try to reclaim their colonies, Ike decided that we would support the French. It was one of those little policy decisions that seemed innocuous at the time, but led to many bigger consequences farther down. So he started sending small groups of advisors to the French army. Then in 1961, the newly elected John Kennedy inherited the presidency from Ike and increased the number of U.S. advisors. Men who trained South Vietnamese troops to protect themselves. It wasn't our war, we weren't fighting, we were training people. These were advisors. Protect themselves and their people better from North Vietnamese aggression. In an attempt to elevate the advisor status, because there was some publicity on TV that was not so good about these advisors. Like some of them were seen wearing black berets with the skull and crossbones on them. And because they were paid extra hazard duty money, they were a mercenary force. And some of them wore MF patch, mercenary force, which is reinterpreted as a curse word as well. This was not good publicity. And Kennedy didn't like it, so he thought he'd bring them out of the shadows, train, put a specific program in place, and train them. Where did the Green Beret come from? John Kennedy's wife, Jackie, loved the French. She was a real Francophile. And the French soldiers wore berets. So she convinced him, her husband, that a Green Beret would set these guys really apart.
Well, why you got the picture there?
That's why.
The big A, what is that identify?
The what?
The shoulder patch.
Ah, this is airborne. This is the 82nd Airborne. These guys were in World War II, Bastogne, the Battle of the Bulge, that's that unit. So the original advisors, the men from the Green Beret, were pulled out of Ranger units and airborne units. And then they were given their own special training by the Fort Bragg. And when I got there in the 60s, if you think of these old barracks, forget about it. I mean, the barracks were it was like a college campus. Two-story nice rooms, playrooms down below, TV rooms, things like that, game rooms. It was a nice setup for a young soldier. And she loved that Green Beret. In a ceremony at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, the president brought these soldiers out of the shadows and established them as the most elite fighting unit in the U.S. military, and subject to the most rigorous training the Army could devise. All had to be fluent in at least 2 languages. And when I got in there, in my high school and the seminary, I'd studied Latin and German and Greek, and I picked up Vietnamese here. So it was no big deal being fluent in 2 languages. Most of these guys that I knew down there were fluent in 3 or 4. All had to be fluent in 2 languages at least, were cross-trained in several different military skills, and most had at least some college education. If you think they're going to be stupid, these guys that I worked with all had, almost all, I didn't know anybody that didn't have some college education, many of them had degrees. I will guarantee you right now that Rambo would never have made it into the Green Berets. Never. We had a full day of psych tests with psychologists, and they're looking for anything that would show you to be a loose cannon, unstable, something like that, and you just wash right out. It didn't matter if you were 6'4" and weighed 240. I had a nephew that had been in the French Foreign Legion, and he wanted to become a Green Beret. Twice he applied, twice they washed him out, both times for the psych. It just wasn't the right material, wasn't stable, wasn't patient, couldn't work well with people, those sorts of things. Anyway, Staff Sergeant Barry Sadler, I met him once in a NCO club, largely because of the Green Berets' visible presence in the growing war in Vietnam and due to a song made popular by Staff Sergeant Barry Sadler. The Green Berets became synonymous in the public mind with Vietnam, jungle warfare, and counterinsurgency. Their training has changed very little since I was in. They still do much the same thing. They've updated, but they've had changed it some. As you'll see in this short clip, now there was a song that Barry Sadler made. He got murdered later in Mexico, but at this time, in the 60s in Fort Bragg, that red patch on his beret is the same patch. We're in the same unit there. When he came back from Vietnam, he was transferred into the 7th. So the patches change. Each patch is a different unit, different colored unit. The song that he made, I'm going to play in a second, not because I think it's a great song, but because it's part of a training clip for Special Forces and it's going to show what we did and pretty much what they do now. And I think there's an ad that I just could not get. Oh, I don't want that one yet. Go back there. No, double click it. I should be able to get the.
That's someone's phone.
Ah, okay.
Let me see, maybe we have to go out of presentation mode.
Okay, there we go. Right now, I should be able to double click this. No? There we go.
Click on this. Okay, we
Let me go back down. Well, I
You
can't.
can't advance it now, I gotta do it.
He's got it.
So can I see that one?
You can see
So,
it.
so you wanna get to the Green Beret guy, right?
Yeah, I want to go back to Barry Sadler because there's a double click on here and it should come up with a little training clip. If I can get, I can skip it.
These are both just like.
So, yeah, did you have a hyperlink then, that took you to the,
Well, what I did was just clicked it twice. There was a little thing that went right in the middle. I clicked that and it would play it. Ah, this is interesting.
Can we find it on the internet?
I don't know. You don't need to worry about it. They trained. We trained. Okay. There's some great shots of jumping out of a. If you've never tailgated out of the back of a C-130 at 18,000 feet and jumped out the back and did a backflip, you don't know what living is really like. There are some things in life that just you want to say, I'm about to die. And then after you're doing it, you say, wow, that was the most incredible experience. I need to do that again and again and as many times as you can. That was Halo. There's some shots of some Halo jumpers in there, and that was what we did. High altitude, low opening. And those are fun jumps, but the high altitude, high opening is more fun. Because you jump out at like 18,000 feet, and you can track 10 miles across country. It's a great way to infiltrate into a place where you shouldn't be. Because you can cross borders from high altitude, high opening. If you know what I'm talking about, you want to cross country. So we'd learn these things. This is not in there, but this is the patch, the shoulder patch that was assigned to the Special Forces. There's 3 lightning bolts. It all means something. The 3 lightning bolts stood for the ways we could infiltrate. We could come in by air, by land, or by sea. And the training involved all 3. So by air, it had to be high altitude, low opening, or high altitude, high opening. The old stick jumps, you see in World War II where a bunch of guys floating down from a low-flying aircraft. We did that. That's how you had to be trained, but you don't ever do that. I mean, you're just a sitting duck. Why would you jump into a place doing that? And so there's some scenes in there on different training from the jumps, from sea. When they drop you out of a helicopter in the ocean and you're not that great a swimmer, and you gotta swim to shore. That's always interesting. I thought I was gonna die. Okay, that was Barry Sadler, that was a song. All right, then I went to John Wayne. Oh, there we go. They even made a popular movie about the Green Beret starting Academy Award-winning John Wayne. Now, you see that patch? That is the 5th Special Forces patch. That is the group of men, if they wore that patch, who were assigned to Indochina. Not just South Vietnam, North Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and Thailand. They were in that entire area. This gives you some idea of the multiplicity of the different flashes. There's the 7th Special Forces. Our area of responsibility was and still is the Western Hemisphere, which means from Cuba south, Central America on down south. There's the 5th Special Forces, which has now been reassigned. It's not in Indochina. There's the 3rd, which I think is Africa. There's the 10th, which I think is Europe. We used to be in Eastern Europe and places like that. There was the, I think the 8th in Afghanistan and Central Asia, those areas. Each unit works different areas.
Karl, did you get any choice in which unit, or you just got assigned to a unit?
Well, that's interesting. I was trained to go to a Vietnamese unit, to the 5th. I learned Vietnamese language. I was prepped to go. But then when, there's a scene in the book where a young guy goes to the officer and says, I'd rather not go. And he's thinking he's going to go to the stockade. But the guy took off his glasses and looked at me and said, well, where do you want to go? I'd never thought that far in advance. You know, I wasn't that deep a thinker. All I knew was guys were coming back, Green Berets were coming back and said, don't go. Johnson's killing us. This has gone right down the tubes. Don't go. And so I took my stand. I said, well, where can I go? He said, well, can you speak Spanish? I said, no, but I could read Latin, and Latin is where Spanish comes from, so I could probably pick Spanish up. He said, well, we got 2 slots open on a Spanish, they call it a Hispanic team. Both are commo operators. I was a communications specialist sergeant. We put you there, and I had visions, oh man, this is going to be so cool. I'll just lay on the beaches down there in, 7th Special Forces. Yeah, I can do that in Puerto Rico and places like that. They had other ideas. But anyway, that was that. But every flash, each one of those men is going to be in a different part of the world. The red flash. This novel, The Green Light, is the story of the 7th Special Forces, the men who claimed the Red Beret flash. Like all other Special Forces units, their motto, De Oppresso Liber, Latin, which I saw right away and fell in love with, means to free from tyranny, or to free from oppression. It was much more than a slogan. Anybody here been in the Marines? The Marine, you know what the Marine slogan is? Always.
Semper Fi.
Semper Fi. That's not just a slogan. It means something to those guys. And when one Marine says that to another Marine, it's an identification and a brotherhood. That's just the way it was. And that's the same thing here. De Oppresso Liber. We didn't go around saying that to each other, but that was what we were about. We weren't there to wipe people out and Rambo the world. We were there to help people. They can free themselves, so they can govern themselves. Okay. Well, many people think of the 1960s as a time of love and hippies and all that stuff. And that might have been true, but it wasn't true for me. It had a darker side. It was a time of political and social turmoil. People say, oh, this is a time of polarization. Yeah, but the cities are still standing. Go back and take a look at them in the 1960s. It was a time of rising anti-war sentiment, aggravated by an incredibly unfair draft system. That's one reason I joined up. I was from a low class, and most of my friends were low-class workers, and they were all getting drafted and sent off to Vietnam. Well, anybody who could get into a university could hide there, as long as they wanted to, and never had to go. I thought, this is the screwiest system anybody could have devised. And those led to increasingly violent actions and increasingly violent reactions by the government. 1968-69, good years, right? Assassinations of prominent leaders such as Martin Luther King Jr. in Memphis as he campaigned for civil rights. Bobby Kennedy was assassinated as he campaigned for the presidency in California. Malcolm X, among others, led to increasingly violent, each time seemed to amplify the disorder and the violence, caused many Americans to question whether or not this nation would even survive to 1970. American cities, LA, Detroit, and DC burned. We came back from a deployment back to Fort Bragg, and they considered sending our unit of Green Berets down for urban warfare training. Would that have been a horrible mistake? It would have been a disaster. We didn't have to, but DC was burning right up the road. Stu Carter and other members of the A-Team 45 were also involved in these civil matters. All this turmoil caused President Johnson to abandon his run for re-election, throwing the presidential race in 1968 into confusion, especially following the murder of Bobby Kennedy, which directly led to the election of Richard Nixon in 1968. Map of Cuba. Havana, the capital of Cuba, 80 miles from the United States. Key West. That's how close it is. With the American public's attention firmly lodged in Southeast Asia, in Vietnam, the struggle for civil rights in the cities in the United States, very few people in this country paid any attention to what was happening south of our borders in Cuba and South America. Especially as long as I got this map here, the Sierra Maestra area, these are mountains, very high wooded mountains, and that's where Fidel Castro ran his revolution from. They were secure. The locations in the book in Cuba are set in the Camagüey province down here, this area. Okay? Bay of Pigs. This novel starts in 1967, only 5 years following the creation of the Green Berets and nearly 4 years after the Cuban Bay of Pigs disaster, followed closely by the Cuban Missile Crisis. Remember the fun and games back then in the 60s? Oh, we thought we were all going to die? Everybody was glued to a TV set somewhere. Didn't matter where. They'd stop by in furniture stores. They put all their TVs in the windows, and people in the streets would stop and watch TV. They didn't have those little things, those little toys. What was going on down there? Fidel Castro had strengthened his grip on the island of Cuba, bringing it firmly into the Soviet Union's sphere of influence. The Soviets propped up his economy, and in return, Castro paid his debt to the Russians by turning the Cuban military into a proxy army for Russia in places like Africa, Angola, and Central Africa for the Russians to use. Into this cauldron of political and military turmoil, the U.S. 7th Special Forces, A-45 and Sergeant Stu Carter, infiltrated into Cuba to make contact with units. Remember, this is only about 6 years after Castro took power. There were a lot of people in Cuba that still thought it was a bad idea. They hadn't all gone to Florida. In order to encourage the resistance to Castro and to hamper Castro's ability to export his revolution overseas, the 7th Special Forces unit was sent in. I know that's true. But that was not the start of A-45's involvement in Latin America. In 1966, just before the time of this book, Che Guevara, the right-hand man to Castro, left Cuba. He was originally an Argentinian. He was not a Cuban. He left Cuba to establish a base of operations to lead a revolution in South America, and he set up his base in the rugged Bolivian lowlands, east of the Andes Mountains. There's Bolivia. I was just down there this summer with my wife, and we were in Peru and Machu Picchu and all that stuff. Bolivia is right here. This is a horrible map because it doesn't show you that Bolivia is two pieces. This is all mountains, the Andes, the high mountains. La Paz is at an elevation of over 12,000 feet. It's the highest capital on earth of any country. But then from there, the land just falls off into the jungle and tributaries to the Amazon and this area. And if you'll notice, Argentina, which is the home of Che Guevara, has a border with Bolivia. From here, this area, right down here, and the book mentions Santa Cruz in this area, Che was hoping to foment a communist rebellion and set himself up maybe as another Castro of South America. Why he chose Bolivia is still questioned. Although the fact that he was from neighboring Argentina may have something to do with it. In Bolivia, into Bolivia, he brought a cadre of like-minded Cubans and other people like himself, revolutionaries, along with his girlfriend. She never makes any press, but I had to mention that because that was important. He brought his girlfriend into a revolution, dealing with indigenous people who were very macho. It's going to cause him problems. He didn't realize it. He just thought he was super cool. You've all seen him posing for the Vogue photo shoot he did way back. That's his favorite. That was his favorite. So he set up shop to recruit local guerrillas. The Bolivian government then requested LBJ to send help to deal with the situation, and the U.S. discreetly sent special forces to work with the Bolivian military. LBJ worried that if it got too much press, it would be so unpopular, we'd have a dirty little war going on in South America. At the same time, this other war, big war, was going on in Indochina, and the Americans wouldn't have taken that. They wouldn't have gone for it. And so the troops were sent there at the Bolivian government's request. There's Che, not quite so photogenic there. LBJ sent U.S. Special Forces, and they performed exactly as expected, training and then leading Bolivian Rangers using local intelligence and the newly developed high-tech night infrared vision, night vision equipment. They tracked Che down. They tracked Che down, and though suffering casualties themselves on the A-team, those two casualties that I mentioned at the beginning, I got onto that A-team. The reason I got on was both combos had been casualties down there doing this. So I was taking the place. So they defeated him and captured